Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, they were the three that we all had penciled in up top and said, this is probably going to be a crew that if they're not all in the Final Four, they're going to at least be in contention heading into that final weekend. From there on down, it gets interesting, and that's where Michigan enters the chat. They've finished their NFL preseason running through Hawaii and a bunch of teams that were never going to have a shot. But Nicole, walk me through now what maybe their evolution looks like, because J.J. McCarthy is going to be in there at quarterback here, offers them a lot of different, but what is the thing that he can change about this offense that might let Michigan do even more of that evolution that we talked about with the other teams?
Yeah, and this has been talked about so much. And so again, like just to quickly recap, I mean, Cade McNamara did everything he was asked to. He beat Ohio State. He won a Big Ten title. He took the team to the playoff. But when they got to the playoff, they clearly were confronted with like the gap that still exists between the true title contenders and then the teams that make the playoff. And they're not alone in this. I mean, Oklahoma's never won a game in the playoff era. Notre Dame's been in this position before. Cincinnati was in this position too. I mean, there's just a gap. We've seen so many blowouts and that semifinal round for a reason. And so I think when you're looking at Michigan, and obviously, you lose, Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, like you're replacing other pieces in other places, but you look at the quarterback position and the fan base sees the future. And so there was always this tension heading into the fall camp and eventually this like 2-week quarterback competition into the season about what someone has done in the past and doing nothing wrong to have been in a position where your job is no longer secure. And then someone that you think the ceiling is so much higher with because of their legs and what that opens up in terms of how defenses have to defend you. But also, J.J. McCarthy's got a laser for an arm. I mean, he is so good. Some of these passes that we have seen out of him, just perfectly placed and like on a rope. I mean, it's been remarkable. I mean, he was a 5-star prospect for a reason, but like there is just something about him. The offense looks easier when he is in the game. So I'm just excited to see all of that. Obviously, the level of competition has not been great. It starts to ramp up. Maryland is not one of the best defensive teams in the league, but they had a couple of really big stops to beat SMU. So like this is where maybe it turns into a little bit of a shootout and there's some pressure on J.J. McCarthy because of that first conference game. And then next week they go to Kinnick, and that's like a totally different level of test for J.J. McCarthy. But I think to your point about like the NFL preseason nature of this schedule, I think that's part of the reason that Jim Harbaugh felt he could do this is because you're not throwing someone into their first start at Kinnick, which has been a house of horrors for Michigan and for other places, other programs. So I hesitate to get too excited, but it just looks really good. The offense looks really good. Blake Corum, 5 touchdowns on 12 carries, very efficient. That's the type of efficiency you really want. But like defensively, they've been solid. They've obviously been playing overmatched opponents, but they have taken care of business exactly how you think a good team should do. So I'm cautiously optimistic. And again, I just think JJ opens up so much in what they can do and the way that teams have to prepare for them, that I think that's going to pay off. It's sort of like it's the quarterback of the future now being in the present, and expectations are high, but the ceiling for the team feels higher because he's the quarterback.
It reeks of what Clemson did with Kelly Bryant giving way to Trevor Lawrence, where, hey, it's not that you did anything wrong, it's just there's ultimately a limit on what we think that you can do. And that's a tough coaching decision to have to make, to stare at the rest of your team and say, hey, listen, you guys all know this guy, you've all seen what he's done. We all got to understand that this is about trying to get to where we all believe that we can go. And for Jim Harbaugh, who now is... We talked so long, I feel like, in the last couple of years about Jim Harbaugh's job security and him taking that bet on himself deal heading into that 2021 season and it paying off. Like, is that, Nicole, is he a Michigan lifer at this point? Is he there as long as he wants to be now after what he accomplished last season?
I mean, it's a good question. You could certainly find people who would have argued that he was kind of in that position anyway, because he was still probably the most powerful person at that campus and that program, because of the way that he was hired and just sort of, again, like we've seen this with some of these places, like it becomes very hard to do anything about the head coach when the head coach is the most important person there. But I think this is going to be an interesting stretch here, because obviously he flirted with the NFL and seemed very interested in pursuing that. I think a lot of Michigan fans understood it and were like, well, this isn't really apples to apples. So if he leaves after he just brought us, the Big Ten title and beat Ohio State and did the things that he promised, like, we understand that. It's not something Michigan, your alma mater, can compare with. But now that that's not an option, and he said like he's not going to pursue that, I do think you wonder about that. Also, how much longer Jim Harbaugh wants to do this in general. I mean, this still is the longest he's ever been at one place. It is his alma mater. He loves Michigan. He loves doing all of this. But right, like what is his plan? I mean, is this the end game? And I think a lot of people, for a lot of people, if you're coaching at your alma mater and you're able to compete for championships, that's great. That's what you're looking for. So I'm very curious to see, what that shapes out to be. And again, if I assume he's going to stick with what he said. He was very definitive about the NFL, right? Like, I'm done pursuing that. I'm not going to do this every single offseason. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And like, when is Michigan going to see some of the fruits of the labor of like the CFP run? Because we didn't really see that bump in recruiting that we were expecting to see. And some of that was tied to this, right? Like, it was a weird off season, and then you had changing coordinators. So that's why I think like these next few months, this season, the off season, and a more normal off season, like all of that's going to be just really fascinating to watch play out. But, again, I think to your point, like, this was a really hard decision to pick the quarterback that he did and the way that he did it. And he's come out of that. I mean, he is a coach that's not afraid of those hard decisions, and seems to understand that Michigan needs to find a different level than it had last year if you really want to compete for national championships. And also Ohio State reloads every single year. So like, it's going to be really, 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 really hard to beat them on a regular basis. So anyway, I don't really know. I don't know what his end game is. I don't know how much longer he wants to coach, if he wants to finish it at Michigan. But I would feel that like he accomplishing all the things you said that you did alleviated so much of that pressure he was facing and all of those tensions that he was dealing with. And now it's really about trying to figure out how to close that gap between, Michigan and the teams that actually win and play for national championships.
It gets so hard when Ohio State's doing what they're about to do this year again, erasing and answering all those questions, because it's a more talented football team now with the defense the way it is. My worry with them is always, and this is the same for teams in the SEC West opposite Saban, who are chief rivals there, when you got your like chief pain, the thing that brings you the most wailing, right in the same division as you, that you got to see and can be the ceiling on what you do, it just seems to do such weird things to the brain chemistry of fan bases when that seems like the wall every year. And if that game is close with Ohio State this year, totally different conversation. But if Ohio State turns back the clock and turns this back into a hammer and nail situation, then the offseason starts to become something I am truly fascinated by in Ann Arbor for that reason. So and I think it's a really great point, because also when you have that team in your own division, they block you from getting to things that are benchmark, like playing for a Big Ten title, playing for an SEC title. It just becomes really hard and really uncomfortable at times. And this thing about like how quickly it got uncomfortable at Notre Dame with the start that Marcus Freeman was staring down. Like, these places that have such traditions and such history, like these things become really frustrating. These things become difficult. Like Penn State. Okay, Penn State's coming off of a great win at Auburn. If they go and play Ohio State and lose by 20 points, we're going to have the exact same conversation that we always have coming out of that game, which is about Penn State has talent, but there's still a talent gap, and there's a development gap, and there's something missing, and blah, 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 blah. And it's the same problem. They're in the same division. So it's not like Penn State is able to win Big Ten titles while still dealing with that and recruiting against Ohio State. No, like, they block you from doing all these things. So it's a great point, because, it just, obviously you're measuring yourself against that rival, but also they block you from achieving like any of the other things that your fan base cares about. Like, it's all the eggs in one basket. Which is why playoff expansion and divisionless conferences being a change that we're going to see for more and more is going to matter so much, because now you can lose to that team in the regular season as this goes forward and maybe still see them in your title game. If you've got one, you've got the 12-team playoff. Now all of a sudden one loss there, if you are still one of the 12 best teams in the country, doesn't necessarily disqualify you from that.